Welcome to the Season 4 of the India Energy Hour podcast. This podcast explores the most pressing hurdles and promising opportunities of India's energy transition through an in-depth discussion on policies, financial markets, social movements and science. Your host for this episode is Shreya J., Delhi-based energy and climate journalist. The show is produced by 101 Reporters, a pan-India network of grassroots reporters that produces original stories from rural India. Climate change is already impacting many rural areas of India. Farmers in rural areas of India are facing rise in temperatures and changes in rainfall that negatively impacts production as well as monetary returns. There are many ways to adapt to the impacts of climate change. One way to assist farmers is the District Agro-met Units, DAMUs, a project of Indian Meteorological Department. DAMUs provide free-of-cost weather advisory services and crucial information related to sowing, use of fertilisers, harvesting and storing crops. Instead of expanding the DAMU, Government of India decided to shut them down. To understand the broader impacts of climate change on farmers, the role of DAMUs, and why government decided to shut them down, we interviewed Rishika Pardikar, an Indian environmental journalist and PhD scholar, Rakesh Nannewar. Both Rishika and Rakesh have extensively written about the role and importance of DAMU units.
At the outset, I just want to welcome Rakesh and Rishika. Of course, Rishika and I have chatted a bit online and in Twitter, and then I came across some of her recent work that has really had a strong impact, and I also learned about Rakesh. So really just want to welcome both of you to the India Energy Hour podcast.
Thank you, Sandeep. Yeah, I've been
Thank
following
you.
your work as well, and I'm equally impressed by your just transition work. Great to finally have a long conversation here.
Wonderful. Um, okay, so let's get started. As we do in this podcast, always we start and just start by talking about like who you are and so on. So let me just start first with Rakesh. Like, tell us about your personal professional journey. And this is something a lot of our guests, a lot of our listeners really enjoy because it gives them an understanding, because climate energy are such fields where people come from all kinds of background, and and then so it's sometimes very inspiring for people who attend. So if you want to just explain your background and your current work, that'll be amazing.
Yeah. So, I'm Rakesh, and first of all, I would like to thank for inviting me for this discussion. Okay. So, basically, I am from Nagpur district of Vidarbha region, Maharashtra, a town named Bhivapur. So, I started my academic journey. I am a civil engineer, graduated from the Nagpur University. Then, after civil engineering, I worked as a junior engineer for 1 year, which is like in department Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, if you know. So, where I was like responsible for the execution of the small scale project of village roads, basically village roads and small and minor bridges. So, I worked as a near about 1 year there. So during my work only, I realized that the apart from technical knowledge, I should understand the governance structure. Basically, that demands very participatory approach, and to deal with various stakeholders such as from the block level officer to gram panchayat, sarpanch, those stuff. So after 1 year of work, then I thought I should pursue my further study. Then in 2015, I joined in TIS under course Regulatory Governance. So during my these days, I realized that I should pursue the field where like the implementation of the services happen. Okay, basically I worked on irrigation project, so irrigation management. So where I check the role of water users association, in one of the Pench irrigation project of Maharashtra. So there I started looking at the aspect of participatory approach, participatory governance model, those stuff. Then after my graduation, I joined here in the National Institute of Advanced Studies as a research associate. Then 1 year I worked on the same issue where water energy agriculture nexus, that topic I was working. Then I joined as a PhD student here. So basically, in my PhD topic, which is like focusing on the impact assessment of one of the agriculture extension service, I'll say agro-meteorological advisory services is a part of a agriculture extension service. So, uh, so my I landed up into the climate change domain from the policy implementation part. So that demands like the analyzing weather and climate services. Then I started my journey in the climate change domain. So now I'm looking at the adaptation part of climate change, basically in agriculture sector. So that's how I landed in climate change issue. So it's not like my background came from
Right.
engineer to policy implementation to the academic career in this domain. So this is how I started.
Right. So you are also one of those who started working in the development space, broadly defined, and then got into climate space. There's many
Yeah, yeah,
who sometimes start in the climate space and then go into development space,
yeah, yeah.
or do both. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Rishika, do you want to also go ahead and share your, like, I mean, in the last 2 3 years, I feel like you have written so many stories on climate and just have follow and punchy ones, not just, like just writing for the sake of, like, really, from IAM models and their inequity to now writing on farm weather services. So it would be great to hear your thoughts on, about, not your thoughts. It'd be great to hear your story as well and how you got interested in climate.
So I have been a journalist for a little over 6 years now. And climate change is one big area of focus. Apart from climate change, I cover wildlife conservation, I cover tribal rights issues, and I also do some science reporting. So I try to cover new research. It helps me also keep updated because I've not studied science, like I've not formally studied science. I've not formally studied journalism also. So by qualification, I'm a chartered accountant. I worked as a CA for a year and a half in a CA firm, in a mid-sized CA firm here in Bangalore. Then I quit and I came into journalism, and I came into journalism as a freelancer. This was a big switch, but when I look back now and when I try to make sense of it now, it makes a lot of sense to me because the reason I got into CA was I was interested in economics. So it was one of my favorite subjects in high school. Economics led me to commerce. Commerce led me to CA, but you can see how it got narrower, right? So economics still has a public interest aspect. With commerce, it gets a little more narrow. With CA, it gets even more narrow. So somehow, I it didn't really fit. So CA, I didn't really enjoy the work that I was doing, even though studies wise, the material wise, it was very interesting, but I didn't find the work very fulfilling. But with journalism, I could get back to the public interest aspect of it. So even during my CA time, I started writing for newspapers. So I remember I wrote about SEZ regulations. When the budget came out, I wrote for Indian Express about the budget, like I just covered the budget. But the more I started doing that, the more I realized that's what I want to do. So I quit and I came into journalism. The quitting happened on not very cordial terms, but that is not the story for this podcast, I think. But yeah, it was slightly impulsive, and so yeah, I quit. But I knew what I wanted to do. It was journalism, so that helped me really focus on what it is I want to learn about, what it is I want to do. And there are many areas around Bangalore. So I started off with a lot of wildlife reporting. So I started traveling to Hills, to Kaveri Sanctuary, to BRT Hills, and I started reporting. Some ground reporting also. So I wrote for Monga Bay. And the more I started doing this, I realized, okay, environment is what is the kind of journalism I want to be doing. And since then, it has been only environment. So throughout my entire time, my focus area has been environment issues, but a variety of environmental issues, whether it was wildlife, tribal rights, and climate change now. My big entry into climate change was because I got a fellowship from Earth Journalism Network. So this was for COP26 in 2021. And I'm really grateful for this fellowship because it has kept me hooked in climate change, because I got a chance to actually go to Glasgow, see how these negotiations happen. And it was crazy, right? So I'm there, I'm a newbie journalist and I'm a newbie climate reporter. But I'm there in Glasgow and I'm meeting these very seasoned diplomats. I'm trying to catch them. They are actually giving me time. So I was so surprised that, okay, these people hold high positions. They're part of the cabinet in their countries. And they're actually talking to me. And that was huge. It was a thrill also as a journalist. And I met a lot of Global South negotiators also. And that's where I think I and speaking to them a lot is how I have shaped my understanding of developmental issues and the Global South perspective. And since the time I covered negotiations here, I have been entirely hooked on the climate beat. It is this one. If I have to trace back my journey into reporting climate, it has been these negotiations. And then I've also covered climate stories from the ground. So I have traveled to villages in Andhra Pradesh. I've traveled to villages in Orissa to see what is happening in coastal areas. I've also reported on agriculture issues before. So the Kaveri Basin is one example. I try to understand what is happening with farmers in the Kaveri Basin here in Karnataka. So climate has become a big area of focus in my work today. And yeah, this is the story.
That's really fascinating. I mean, if I'm correct, without any formal training, and now you've become such a powerful voice of climate and environment issues. But anyway, let's kind of get started because I really want to spend quite a bit of time on the topic itself. Thank you both for sharing your background, which is always, this is probably one of my favorite parts of the podcast. I love hearing people's backgrounds and their stories and how people come from different lenses and evolve and so on. So, given both of your expertise, let me just start with like kind of big picture question and then get into more nuanced detail. So, as a reporter, Rishika, you've been, like you said, you've been traveling and reporting. What kind of impacts, climate impacts, do you see on the ground, especially in rural areas? And what have been your personal experience or what you have heard from people on the ground, and love to hear some anecdotes or stories if you have.
So I think I can pick. As well, I'll start off with the Andhra Orissa example. So I had traveled to these two coastal villages, one in Andhra and one in Orissa. This was to understand the effectiveness of geotextile tubes. So these are supposed to be a climate adaptation measure, and the Indian government has installed these geotextile tubes in two villages in these two states. So I went there to check if it is working or not. So firstly, geotubes are basically big tubes. They are filled with sand. They are covered with rocks and maybe a mesh. So you can think of it like those tetrapods on Marine Drive. It's supposed to be something. It's supposed to give the similar kind of effect. And these are placed on beaches. So this is supposed to help safeguard the villages that lie within the length of this geotextile tube. And in lengthwise, they can run to almost a kilometer. So I went to these two places to understand whether this is helping or not, how people see it. But what I found was, okay, so firstly, maintenance work was not carried out. That is one issue that was there. But even if maintenance would have been carried out, it still wouldn't have safeguarded all of the houses there. So I traveled in maybe January or February. So cyclone season here in India is monsoon season. So I traveled after that. And in the previous monsoon, there was a cyclone and some houses were still destroyed. So when I went and I spoke to the people there, they still were very apprehensive of whether this small structure. So to them, it was a small structure that couldn't really safeguard anything. And I remember I met this one lady. She was probably 60 years old, 55, 60 years old. And in her lifetime, she had moved houses thrice because her home was destroyed thrice. And I also met many other people, and their core demand was rehabilitation. They don't want to live there anymore. They have seen too much being destroyed by living there, and they wanted to be relocated somewhere else. Then I went and I spoke to the panchayat members. They had a slightly more, at least they spoke a little more positively about the geotextile tube. But that, I think, that was partly fueled by their inability to meet demands of rehabilitation. So a panchayat does not have the money to just to rehabilitate hundreds of people somewhere else. They don't have the money to buy land and rehabilitate that many people. Like entire village is impossible. So, but you can see how socioeconomic vulnerabilities play out, right? Both at the people level and also at the administration level. Which gram panchayat has the money to rehabilitate people? No one. So this was one impact, and so coastal villages. So if you are in Mumbai, for example, even Mumbai, there are many people who cannot afford to relocate, but there are also people. There are many people who can. But in these coastal villages, it's. I don't think anyone can afford to move somewhere else. It's very difficult. So it again falls back on the government to have good plans. So these geotextile tubes, I think they are a short-term measure. Maybe it can help if done right, if designed well, if maintenance work is carried out. But people's apprehensions are a lot more. The other report I did was I went to some islands in the Sundarbans area, and there again, because again it's a soil erosion, cyclonic storm surges, this kind of impact, and there people have completely shifted from agriculture to shrimp farming because it's so saline that they cannot do agriculture anymore. They've completely changed their livelihood patterns. The other report actually was from the Kaveri Basin here in Karnataka. So Kaveri Basin extends into Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry, and Kerala also, but I just focused on Karnataka area. And it's a very fertile area. Agriculture is the dominant livelihood for many people in the Kaveri Basin. They grow things like rice, sugarcane, ragi also. So here, this was in 2019. And what happened here was, so June, July are typical sowing months. But in June, July, there was almost no rainfall, very, very scant rainfall. And in August, there was a complete excess of rainfall. So whatever little they had sowed in June, July, even that got destroyed in August. And I spoke to some farmer associations here in Karnataka, and all of them were again saying the same thing. If this keeps happening, then there's no way they can cope with it. Actually, and if people are interested, they can go check this India Spend story. You can see the maps there. For June and July, the maps are red, orange, and yellow, deficient rainfall. For August, it is completely dark blue and like bright blue, complete excess. And I will really not be surprised if in the last few years also the same patterns have repeated and farmers have been equally hit again and again year after year. Like, so this is the kind of impact that people in rural India are facing, whether it is a coastal village, whether it is farmer. So even if you're a forest dweller, so in India, land tenure is not very secure. Eviction threats are always looming. So climate change there acts as a multiplier. These are like it's really sad what is happening to a huge majority of India's population who are vulnerable socioeconomically. They are not as privileged. So yeah.
No, thank you for kind of sharing anecdotes on the ground. Not only there is impact, but also the adaptive capacity of the state or the stakeholders is something that one could spend the whole episode on. It's one of the most interesting aspects of this. Let's turn to Rakesh. I know you have worked a lot with farmers, so do you want to kick things off with just explaining the kind of impacts that farmers are facing in particular because of increased impacts of climate change?
According to me, like the challenges, the key challenges for the farmers, I'll say from the two aspects, major two aspects. The first aspect of this is the weather related, and which we can say direct or indirect way, both direct way or indirect way. And the second aspect of is this input related. So in weather related aspect, we can see that the untimely rainfall, okay, then um, the increase in extreme events, then the this type of with the increase in extreme events that leads to the pest attacks, those stuffs. So that is one key challenges at the crop production level they are facing. And the second they are facing is related to inputs. So the basically input procurement, which is like seed, fertilizer, manure, those procurements. Then the which is then the access to irrigation, that is the one. Then the access to credit, then access to extension services. This is the second aspect of it. So the key challenges in this climate change and otherwise also they face are in this two way, which is first in crop production level and the second is in social, economic and the governance level. And there is a third part of it is like the synergy interplay among these two aspects that leads to another challenge. Okay, so as Rishika also said that the climate change becomes a multiplier effect for the existing challenges. So the I'll according to me the Indian farmers facing these two main major challenges currently. And uh, I wanted to bring to your notice that the historically the crop production is being affected by the irregular monsoon. So it's not the new phenomena, but it came. Their challenges came into the domain of as we are discussing climate change in a larger aspect, in a larger forum. That challenges brought into the picture, which are otherwise also they are facing. So one of that, if we see the social challenges, where the small and marginal cultivators, which have the low access to technology. Okay, so then the second aspect of it is the literacy level and the governance level, which is extension services. So access to extension services are very low. Okay, so these challenges, which are generally faced by the cultivators, and due to erratic monsoon and the increase in extreme events, that that is getting intensified. These challenges are getting intensified for the basically Indian farmers. Yeah. So that are the major.
Wonderful. So I think erratic weather patterns
Yeah.
is one of the challenges you have to. That actually feeds into the next question I have, which I'll
Yeah.
start with Rishika again, because it's something she's been reporting on. I think one of the ways to assist. I mean, of course, you'll have so many interventions. Climate and development issues have so many intersectional points, but one of the things was to set up these agro-met units, which provided free of cost weather advisory services and information on farmer fertilizers, crops, etc. to farmers. Could you just tell us the history of this, what it was meant to do? I think this was a government program. So if you can just, for our listeners' sake, just give a background of what that is.
So the government launched a scheme called Gramin Krishi Mosam Seva, GKMS. And under this scheme, they established District Agro-met Units, DAMUs, across like almost 200 districts. So basically, the idea was to take weather data and turn them into useful agricultural advisories for farmers. So basically, what DAMU staff do is they take data from IMD, for example, rainfall, for example, humidity, wind speed, and they prepare agricultural advisories twice in a week for farmers in their district. So what DAMU staff do is they actually take weather information from the IMD and they convert them into useful inputs for agricultural practices. So, for example, if a farmer knows that in the coming week there will not be much rainfall, he can delay sowing or he can make arrangements for irrigation. So, actually, firstly, what everyone should know is that around 85% of farmers in India are small and marginal, and a vast section of them depend on rain-fed agriculture. So this means they are directly vulnerable to weather variability. So if you're a small farmer dependent on rain-fed methods, then you should know how weather would vary next week, tomorrow, whatever it is. So these weather advisories would go to farmers in advance. So they would be prepared this week, for example, with information for the next week. So the farmer can actually plan and prepare what to do. And it's not just just about rainfall or irrigation. So they would tell them when to sow, when to harvest, how much fertilizer to use, and also soil moisture, everything. So even irrigation depends on soil moisture, right? So the DAMU staff would give them all of this information. So this scheme was literally about giving farmers information. Information is a very powerful tool. So not all of us recognize it. So obviously there are climate adaptation measures, there are climate resilient practices, seeds maybe. All that is great, but then we don't value information enough. And I think that is my biggest learning from tracking this scheme now for a few months, that we don't recognize the value of information, just pure information, whether it is the Right to Information Act itself or even things like weather advisories. We really need to recognize that empowering people to take their own decisions, science and information is the biggest tool, at least one of the biggest tool. Obviously, you need money and you need things to implement these, but we don't recognize the value of information enough, and that is what this scheme was doing. Like to me, literally, this scheme is the first time I have seen science being taken directly to people and people using science, them actually putting it into practice. And this was a government scheme fully funded by the government and made available to farmers for nothing, for no cost. And I think the biggest design advantage of this scheme was that these DAMUs were co-located within the Krishi Vigyan Kendras, KVKs. So KVKs are associated with the local agricultural university. I have visited the one here in Bangalore. So these KVKs and the agriculture universities also, they already have networks with millions of farmers. They have routine interactions with farmers for a lot of other things, whether it's an exhibition on seeds, other research, whatever it is. So DAMUs could actually build on this network of, I mean, they could actually take advantage of this network which is already existing. And the other, I mean, this scheme was really well designed. So, for example, the advisories that were going to farmers was going in local languages and many times in-person communication also. So, for example, in parts like North Karnataka, there's a literacy problem among farmers. Not everyone can actually read. So, if you give an advisory, even in the local language, even in Kannada, if they are not literate enough, they will not be able to make use of that information. But DAMU staff were also DAMU staff and KVK staff, the Krishi Vigyan Kendra, they were also giving them in-person communication. So it was just a really well-designed, a very ground-up kind of scheme, and there was a lot of scope for extending the scheme, enhancing, because there are only about 200 district agro-met units. So we have many more districts in India. So there was a lot of scope to actually improve the capacities of these staff, to extend this to many more districts also. And over the years, multiple studies over the years, including the study conducted by Rakesh, they have shown that this agriculture advisory services have benefits in terms of improved yield for farmers and lower input cost. So if you use fertilizers efficiently, if you know when to use fertilizer, when to use pesticide, how effectively to use it, you will minimize your input cost also. So both in terms of minimized input cost and higher yield, like there were direct material benefit to farmers from this scheme.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for explaining the background of this. I think I have a lot of questions. I want to come back to you about, some of your experience, but let me turn to Rakesh because he studies this in a more, scientific and academic way. So what are your thoughts about such informational service based units or agromet units? And you
Mm.
also wrote a paper, Rakesh, which I
Yeah,
quote
yeah,
is the role of agro-meteorological advisory services in enhanced food
yes,
security
yes,
and
yes.
reducing vulnerability to climate change. Can you explain about the paper? What was the study? What did you find? And your overall thoughts on agromet units?
Okay. So I'll start with my thoughts on these agromet units. So as Rishika correctly pointed out, the this advisories services is started means now currently they are giving under the scheme Gramin Krishi Mosam Seva. But I would like to give the little bit historical background of these services. So basically, it's all started by 1932 when the agrometeorology is being recognized that started to understanding crop weather relationship. So they started this agrometeorology in IITM Pune first, that branch in IITM Pune in 1932. So after that, 1945, the first farmer bulletins they started. Okay, but that was very vague because that time, till that time, the understanding of weather and crop has not well studied in academic domain. So then later they started studying the crop phenomenological stage wise weather requirements. So those studies happened in India. And in 1991, this Agro-met field units started. So Agro-met field units are like um, the sets of observation data collecting for the weather, uh, collecting for the agriculture advisories. So near about 130 Agro-met field units started in India. Then after that, 2008, when these services are uh, services used to provide through the two departments, one from the ICAR, which is from the agricultural Ministry of Agriculture that way, and one through the IMD. So in 2008, they merged it, and the collectively the name is Integrated Agriculture Agrometeorological Advisory Services. I'll repeat this sentence. So in 2008, this district level advisories just started providing through the agromet field units, and that scheme was known as uh, Integrated Agriculture Agrometeorological Advisory Services. So after that, in 2012, by 12, I think 12 Planning Commission, they have suggested the scheme, and that's Integrated Agrometeorological Advisory Services are named as a Gramin Krishi Mosam Seva. From that, the district level advisories will be provided by merging ICAR plus IMD. So then this with the help of the expertise from the ICAR, State Agriculture University, and the IMD, they started preparing the bulletins at the district level. And in 2018, then they started this agrometeorological advisory services at the block level. So during that period, near about 199, near about 200 DAMUs they established at KVKs. So, as Rishika correctly said, the logic was that the KVKs is the existing public extension unit, and where the expertise are already there. So they can prepare these advisories. And if you see the structure of this bulletin, so these bulletins at the block level generally provided in a week two times, Tuesday and Friday, one in regional language and one is in English. So and this bulletin for that, the forecast information is being provided through the Med Center. Med Center now for the Karnataka Med Center, State Med Center is in Bangalore. Okay, so Med Center provide this forecast information at the ground level IMD units, which are one is agromet field units, one is district agromet units, and with the help of this meteorological forecast information and the information which is being collected by the DAMU officials and the AMFU official regarding the crop stage situation at that block level, at that district level, by amalgamation of both information, they prepare the advisories. Okay, with the experts. So there are existing experts they use. So generally in academic term, we say that this services is multi-institutional and multi-channel. Okay, so this is how they prepare the bulletins. Okay, once this bulletin is being prepared, then there are various communication method through which they disseminate this service. Okay. So there are various challenges in that communication also, but basically that is being reached till now in very large proportion. Near about 43 million farmers are the beneficiaries of these services, according to the government data only. And the near about I'll tell you the exact number. 700 districts are covered through these advisories, and 3,000 blocks. There are about 3,000 blocks, which is like taluks, is being covered through these services till now. So this is the idea of the services, how these services work, and how the preparation happen. Then I'll come to the exact my uh, huh, my take on this services. So basically, this service is doing science for the farmer. I feel in that way, doing science for the farmer. And first, I would like to explain this theoretically what this services means. So I studied in such a way where I have studied these services overall the when these 1960s our green revolution time and all. Any technology takes time to diffuse. That's what the understanding is. Any scientific information takes time to diffuse in the society. That's how this service is also overall over the period we are seeing. Now that diffusion at the ground level is visible. So through my research, I identified that the uh, when I when I started studying these services is being used by the cultivators. Okay, so these are very useful service. Yeah. So in this uh, advisory services, there are forecast information on the seven weather parameters: rainfall, temperature, minimum and maximum temperature, relative humidity, then the wind speed and wind direction. That's seven. And first part of it will be the forecast for the next 5 days. Okay. And the second part of it is the agriculture advisories. So these agriculture advisories are crop specific and crop stage specific. Okay, so it's like from the beginning, so they have created this agromet field units, crop weather calendar for each crop, so that they can use this calendar for the region, for the each agroclimatic zone. Okay, so with this, they prepare the advisories for each crop. Here, the thing is the role of these DAMUs, AMFUs is to know, understand the current situation of crop. Okay, what exactly is happening, the current situation of crop, so that they can give accurate information related to the advisories. And this advisories, how it helps to the farmer to take a better decision, okay, to take an informed decision. As Rishika also correctly pointed out, it's a knowledge based service, okay. So you are not giving it anything physically, but it's a knowledge, okay. So that's ultimately reducing their risk, okay. The risk of production they are going to reduce with this informed decision, okay. There what the exact intervention is, and how then it's reflect into your productivity, those stuff. Okay, so there are lots of literature which has been proved that these advisories are useful for the farmers, and that is translated into the economic gain also. Okay, so now I'll come to the my research study. Okay, so I studied this impact of this advisory services in North Karnataka. I think everyone are aware of North Karnataka. So this is Hyderabad Karnataka part. Now it's known as the Kalyan Karnataka region, which consists of the six districts: uh, Bidar, Kalburgi, then Yadgir, Raichur, Koppala, and Bellary. So in the Kalyan Karnataka region, there are two agromet field units, AMFUs. AMFU is in Raichur and one AMFU is in Bidar. Okay, and three DAMUs. Okay, in Koppal, in Yadgir, and in Bellary. There are three DAMUs in this region. So overall, this is a rain-fed region, completely rain-fed region, and the agriculture are dependent on monsoon. The main objective of my study was to assess the impact of AS on the crop yield and the farm income. Okay, so I first studied the district Raichur and Bidar, and we have selected 10 villages for the primary field survey. So near about 78% miss. I'll discuss the findings of my this study. So I'll go with the first the socioeconomic profile in my study area. So near about 78% of cultivars cultivators were the small and marginal landholders. And near about, if we see the social strata, 50% of cultivar belongs to other backward classes. And I would like to inform you that the Raichur district is one of the low literacy rate. Raichur district has one of the low literacy rate in Karnataka itself. So it got reflected in my study also. Near about 63% of cultivators, the head of household of the uh, means cultivator head of household do not know how to read and write. So that was the scenario for the Raichur district, and near about 42% cultivator from the Bidar districts who do not know the read and write. And when I see from the gender perspective, uh, only 10% cultivator household headed by the women. So that is the large gap. Large gap was there. Then I studied the five major crops to assess the impact of this area. Basically, pigeon pea, pearl millet, soybean, chickpea, and paddy. So, in the three crops, what I found that the yield difference between beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries. For pigeon pea, it was 233 kg per hectare, and for soybean 98, and for pearl millet 318. So beneficiaries have higher was have means for these three crop beneficiaries has higher yield than the non-beneficiaries. So for the farm income, I have estimated the then then I have used the yield difference which I have found for these three crops, where the AS played a major role. So those who are the beneficiaries of these services has higher yield. Okay, for these three major crops. Then I have calculated the farm income. So I use this yield difference, and I have found that near about 11,000 rupees per hectare, uh, generally as higher for the beneficiaries than the non-beneficiaries cultivators in my study area, and it reflect around 9,000 rupees per household. Okay, so can be saved for the beneficiaries of this aids. And by using multiplier uh, for the whole two districts, near about till $9 million potential increase for the all likely non-beneficiaries in the study districts. So that was for these three major crops. So from this study, we understood that the income means the economic benefit uh, should be told to the people. Okay, that this advice for the dissemination and utilization of this service. Okay, and the penetration of the service at the higher level. Okay, so this is was the major finding from my study
Right.
area. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for breaking it down and explaining that. Um, so, I mean, given all these benefits and clear scientific evidence and also ground evidence that Rishika you just found and visited those centers, like, why did the government shut it down or thought about like this is not a good idea? Can you tell us the whole story of how that transpired and what you reported and what's the final outcome as of today?
Yeah, so I think around January of this year, I started getting messages from DAMU staff saying that their offices are being shut down. Uh, Obviously, they were all very concerned. So I got messages from and across the country from many DAMU staff. I got these messages. So then I went and I checked, and there was an IMD order issued. I think on 17th January, saying that these offices will be shut down in March. Then when I try to dig a little more and see what happened, how why are these randomly being shut down, I couldn't find much. But what I found was that it was a finance ministry meeting decision. So my first guess was, okay, maybe the finances, there's a crunch and that's why it is being shut down. But I really wanted to understand what happened in the finance ministry meeting. How did they arrive at this decision? So I started filing RTIs. I filed RTIs with many ministries. I filed RTI with Earth Science Ministry. I filed an RTI with Agriculture Ministry. I filed RTI with finance ministry. Sometimes, so it got kicked around a little bit. One or two went to the appeal stage also. I didn't get proper information, but finally something worked, and I did get this information through RTI. And when I was reading through the minutes of the meeting, I shared the minutes of the meeting with Rakesh also because he knows this subject. And I also shared it with some other journalists I know, and I read through it as well. So yeah, when I was reading through these finance ministry meetings, what I found was there was not a single mention, like literally zero mention of the benefits of the scheme. There was no mention of it, but worse was the fact that there was misrepresentation. So first thing is you don't take into account benefits. Secondly, you misrepresent, and this misrepresentation came from Niti Aayog. So what the Niti Aayog did was the Niti Aayog said data collection is automated, so we can reevaluate the necessity of having DAMU staff. But this is entirely false because data is not automated. DAMU staff take weather information from IMD. They actually they have you, so you have to apply your mind to take raw rainfall like in mm, so rainfall data in or humidity or whatever it is, to actually convert it into agricultural advisory, like when to sow, when to harvest, how much fertilizer to use. This is not automated. This cannot be automated, like, because okay, so have you ever noticed that if it's raining in your house, it will not be raining 2-3 streets down the line, right? Because it varies that much. So IMD will give you district information. You have to first you have to downscale it, because every farm it's different, right? Like if it's raining here, it won't be raining somewhere else in the same district also. Forget same district, it goes down even more downscale than that. So, and soil variety varies. So if soil variety is not the same across the district, rainfall is not the same across districts. So DAMU staff actually customize for that. Plus they take raw weather data and turn it into agriculture advisory as to when to sow and when to harvest and how much fertilizer to use, where to store crops, all of that. So this was complete misrepresentation by the Niti Aayog. Unfortunately, even the Ministry of Earth Science didn't really clarify. So the Ministry of Earth Science also said DAMU staff only disseminate data and there is no role assigned to DAMU staff. I'm quoting literally from the Finance Ministry meetings. So even the Earth Science Ministry failed to communicate that DAMU staff are very essential for personalizing and customizing this information and turning data into advice, into agricultural advice. Niti Aayog went a step further. So after misrepresenting the role of the DAMU staff, Niti Aayog also suggested privatization. They said there is a scope for monetization of this weather data. So as of now, currently in India, there are private players who do provide weather advisory services. I actually found one in my area here in Bangalore. There's one person who provides these services. I have not evaluated what the services are like. Maybe they're great. Maybe they have their flaws, whatever it is. But the biggest problem I saw is the pricing. So if you recollect, I said that 85% of farmers in India are small and marginal. How will they be able to afford to pay? They already have debt stress. There is already a farm crisis brewing for decades now. How will they be able to afford these services? So I'm writing another report now. I'm trying to find out what these private services are, what are their prices like. So, and this is just broad prices. I got this information from KVK people. I got this information from private players themselves, who said that it is around 20 per year. It can go up. It can go as high as 60 to 80,000 per year if you want downscaled farm level agricultural advisories. Now, people who can afford this are probably like grape farmers in Nashik, probably, or maybe horticulture people who need very downscale data and who can afford to pay. That is more important, who can afford to pay for these kind of services. But a regular farmer, an average farmer in India, will not be able to pay. And the other problem with privatization is that there could be bias, right? And bias is so for example, private players have links with many. They have links with insurance companies. They have links with fertilizer brands, for example. So how do you decide? How do you decide that this private business is giving me this advice not because of his ties with this, not because he thinks that fertilizer is great or his bias, but because he thinks it's good for me? How do you differentiate? So yeah, these two points make privatization of this service unaffordable and unviable also to many farmers. But none of this was taken into account. So firstly, I spoke to one person who previously headed Agro-met services at the IMD, and he's quoted in my report as well, Kamlesh Singh. So he was saying that even according to the Earth Science Ministry's own estimates, this scheme costs around 45 to 50 crores a year. Like across India, that is the cost, that is the budget outlay. But the benefit is around 15,000 crores. The benefit is in terms of higher yield and reduced input cost. So these were not taken into account at all at the finance ministry meeting. Plus there was misrepresentation. Plus there was a push for privatization, which is unaffordable in India. So I mean, that's just I'm sorry, but it's a complete train wreck of a meeting. And as a journalist, I am allowed to say that because I have seen how badly the decision was taken. It was a bad decision. But thankfully, there has been some reporting now that the government is rethinking this. And I've even heard from people who work quite closely with the ministry that it is being reviewed. I mean, they are thinking of reviving and bringing back District Agro-met Units, and that's great. Like, I'm very glad to hear this. But it's still sad that a good scheme, which should have been enhanced, if anything, in the climate change era, we should be working on climate adaptation services. This scheme, a working scheme which should have been enhanced, was shut down, and now I don't know when the revival will happen. So there's a huge break now. There's a huge gap now. And some DAMU staff, they had to go to court also. They have got stay orders in some states, like Karnataka is one state I know. Even in states like Orissa, I think, and Maharashtra, DAMU staff, they have filed court cases and they have got a stay order. So they are continuing to provide the service. But yeah, as a nationwide scheme, it is abruptly shut down now because of very, very poor decision-making skills. And one DAMU staff even told me this, I have quoted him in my report, where he said that if they had consulted even one farmer, they would know how much a farmer would benefit from the service. Because that finance ministry meeting, there was no farmer representative. There was no voice that could speak to what kind of benefit a farmer gets from this scheme. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing all the details. I mean, I just want to go back to your like big picture point. I mean, this is a case in point that sort of demonstrate how little we value information, right? I mean, like in our work or in other work on climate globally, we have seen that it all starts with information. Even implementation has to start with information. You can't implement anything if you have no information. So I'm just wondering if you want to speak a bit more about the value of information in general, about sort of like why it's crucial for climate adaptation, and also if you want to just if you have any stories that talk about beyond this agromet issue. It's congratulations, that seems like you had a big impact, and it's in the revival stage. That is like a dream for a journalist. I've been a journalist in my past life, so congratulations on that. But like, I want to hammer this point about information and the value of the power of sort of information and why it's crucial for adaptation. And if you have any solutions to that end, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I think there has to be a wider recognition of the importance of information. So everyone broadly talks about climate change awareness, right? So we all talk about how there is not enough awareness across countries, and this is said about India also. But anyone who has ever spoken to a farmer will not say farmers do not have climate change awareness, because a farmer who has seen rainfall variability year on year, season after season, not even year on year, season after season, a farmer who has seen that patterns are not what they were like before. Any farmer will tell you, okay, what we are seeing today is not normal. Maybe he will not use a word saying climate change, but that doesn't mean that they're not aware of how weather patterns have completely changed. So imagine if your livelihood, if your life is completely dependent on this one work that you do, which is farming, and if that is impacted by weather variability, will you not be aware of it? It's impossible for you to not be aware of it. So I think firstly we need to correct how we see climate change awareness, and more broadly, I would really be happy if we start recognizing the value of information. Like, stop talking about climate change awareness, try to engage with farmers with what they know already, and they know this from the ground. So I know climate change from a climate science point of view, but my life personally has not been very much impacted by climate change. I can stay indoors, I can turn on the AC. But for a farmer who has seen weather variability, who has seen how rainfall patterns have changed, like, try to build on that knowledge. I think the way we approach this question should be different, and also valuing information. So we think of, so when we talk about agriculture and adaptation, we think of climate resilient seed varieties, for example. or some other technology which is great. Like, I'm not against technology. I think it's excellent. I think we need it. I think it's a very, very useful tool. But we also need more information. And this scheme was one of those schemes where, so imagine 10, 20 years after using this information, after a farmer will read rainfall in Canada. So we'll read about what the rainfall numbers are like, what the humidity is like, what the wind speeds are like. He would know how to use it. You maybe a few years, maybe a few decades later, you will not need DAMU staff because of so much interaction and collaboration between them already. The farmer can do it himself. So anyway, IMD data is public, right? Anyway, IMD data is public and it is freely available to all. And this is how you improve, how you disseminate information. Actually, this is what science education is. So tomorrow, if the farmer can himself take this and see how to better crop, how to better have cropping patterns, then that's great. So I say this even about the RTI Act. So if you, I don't have the data for this, but I'm quite sure that if you try to get data about who uses RTI most, it'll be probably like a student filing about examination results. It'll be like a worker asking about minimum wage, asking about some contracts. So it is people to whom this information is crucial to livelihood and crucial to life. So journalism, obviously, journalists also use it, but I think we tend to forget a vast section of society for whom these services are necessary, are utterly necessary. And we really need to value information a lot more. So yeah, that's what I want to say about this.
Right. Thank you for passionately sharing, and I completely agree with you. Anything starts with information, then only you can go higher up the chain. Rakesh, let's turn to you and let me ask you this sort of like last set of two questions. We're almost at an hour. Because you studied this topic of agro-met units and generally agriculture, like what are the other ways? So obviously, agro-met units are one way to adapt to the impacts of climate change. That's one way farmers would benefit. That's the information. What else? What are the other ways farmers can adapt to the impacts of climate change in India?
Uh, yeah. So there are lots of studies which has studied the real time like the contingency plan, like the real time how we can improve the farm management practices at the particular weather situation. Those studies already has been done, and based on those studies, there are lots of climate resilient varieties they have developed. Okay, so now became the major challenge is to provide these climate resistant varieties to the cultivators, so adequate inputs. So that's how the first step for the to improve the resilience and to reduce the adverse effect of the weather and climate variability. So that is the first step the already they are taking, but now we have to put it into the large scale. So now there is institutions like Nikra Krida. They have developed those varieties for the climate resilient varieties. So now the main point is making the robust extension system. So what I mean by that, the robust agriculture extension system, where uh, so one of the objective of the agriculture extension is to take a feedback, the feedback mechanism, where in these services also, that was the major part, that was doing a major part. There is a means the farmer should give feedback on the advisories. In that way they can improve the service or the quality of the agriculture bulletins. So this is how the main aspect of the extension, where the feedback mechanism should come. Means the feedback from the farmer should come to the any services or the related to technology, whether that technology is suitable for that agroclimatic zone. So everything is changes with the crop specific, region specific. Okay, so every region demands in a different manner. Okay, then the every cultivators. So like the small and marginal have the different sets of challenges than the large and the medium landholders. So we have to put it in such a way where the one model can't fit everything. Okay, we have to go with a targeted manner. We have to target the because with increase in the extreme events, the small and marginal cultivators become more vulnerable. Okay, so we have to target those cultivators. We have to save their yields. We have to manage their risk. So we have to provide them with the climate resilient varieties so that they can save their crops. So these are the broad. My thought is like adequate inputs, whether that is the land, seed, fertilizer, and irrigation, because irrigation also becomes very important in a rain-fed region. So, like where I studied the Kalan Karnataka region, the irrigation is one of the important aspect. So, the various watershed management program, okay, so that the groundwater level should improve. Okay, so that those stuff they should do. So overall, the ecosystem they should make where the all input adequate input should be provided to the farmers so that they can save their crops. That's what the apart from the AAS they can provide with this service. Understood.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Rishika, do you want to take us home with any sort of last thoughts about like what would be kind of your big picture recommendations looking into this, but also generally about like how do we adapt to the impacts of climate change, especially in rural areas? And really appreciate your thoughts. So yeah, take us home with that.
Yeah, so this is I'll try to expand on what I was reading even in the recent IPCC AR6 report. So there is a chapter on sustainable development. It's great. I think everyone, if you can. So I know that people don't usually read IPCC reports, and completely even I haven't read all the chapters because they are quite dense. But this one chapter I would recommend. So it's about sustainable development, and it is really eye-opening in the way that okay, these are some things that we think we know, but it's good to have data back it up. I think 40% of people in high income countries will experience impacts only at 3 degrees, what a low income country would experience at 1.5, what an average citizen of a low income country would experience at 1.5. I mean, this is, we know how much poverty and inequality play a role, but it's good to have data and analysis to actually articulate what this is like. And that chapter is just great. So recently I was reading it like minutely, and there was this other section where it said that even if emissions are kept low and we keep 1.5, we actually meet the 1.5 degree C target, we keep warming below 1.5, even then if we have poverty and inequality, adaptation will be a problem because capacity to adapt will not be much. I think for a country like India, this holds a big lesson because poverty, obviously, we see it everywhere. You can't be in India and not see poverty. And for inequality, I would talk about caste. So this is, you do need to address issues of poverty and caste and other inequalities also, like gender is one. Um, I think our adaptation plans should be a lot more tailored to what does adaptation mean for us. So information, I brought it up. The other gap I see is there's not enough focus on caste. I'm not the person to talk about it because I've not done any research on caste. I don't know, but I know that many people are actually working on how to try to address caste inequalities with climate change adaptation like research. And I think that's great. I mean, I think we have to tailor our adaptation strategies to what our local realities are, and our local reality is poverty. Our reality is caste. So if you go to a village, so if you ask me what I would want this village to be like, I would say I wouldn't want so many people to be poor. I wouldn't want so many people to be uh, to suffer from caste, to suffer from caste inequalities. And this is what we have to address. Yeah, so information, inequality, poverty. Those are my three messages. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such powerful set of lines and sentences to end. I thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate your time. And I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy this episode where we did an interplay between science, theory, and also like real journalism with impact. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you for
Thank
inviting
you.
me.
Thank you for listening to the India Energy Hour. Subscribe to this channel to never miss an update. To drop us a feedback, visit our website or write to us at theindiaenergyhour@gmail.com. We are on Twitter. You can follow at TIEH_podcast and get in touch with the two hosts at Shreya_J and at Sandeep Pai.